You know, when you talk about the Premier League these days, it's impossible not to think about the Big Six. And Chelsea are one of the strongest pillars of the Big Six. Whether you like Chelsea or not, it's undeniable to consider Chelsea as an elite club. With 6 league titles, 8 FA Cups and 5 League Cups, Chelsea have done quite a fair bit in writing their name in the history of English football. But their success isn't just confined to the borders of England. In Europe, they won 2 Champions Leagues, 2 UEFA Cups, and my personal favorite, purely for just nostalgic reasons, 2 Cup Winners Cup trophies as well. But if you look closely into Chelsea's trophy cabinet, you're not gonna see much dust on it. They actually look quite brand new and shiny. Matter of fact, most of those trophies were won in the last 2 decades, which led so many people accusing Chelsea of not having a history before this man took over. But we're not here to talk about what Abramovich has done for the club. We all know how important he's been to Chelsea, but the question is, how good were Chelsea before the Abramovich takeover? Well, I kinda like talking about pre-Abramovich era of Chelsea. For 2 reasons. A. As a fan of Italian football, Chelsea has always had a strong link with Italian football, both before and after the takeover. And B. I actually remember the Chelsea of the late 90s and early 2000s, so there's gonna be many personal anecdotes in this video. Right, so despite what many people think about Chelsea's lack of history, they actually have a very interesting history behind them. To understand the pre-Abramovich history, we gotta go back. Way back to 1955, when Chelsea won their first league title. This was followed by an FA Cup in 1970 and a European Cup Winners Cup in 1971. That was huge for the club. FA Cup was massively respected back in the day, far more than these days, and they even won a European trophy as well. At this point, you'd be excused to think that this could be a springboard for Chelsea to challenge for the league title again. But this is when Chelsea entered the decline, a long and painful decline with massive financial issues. After just a few years away from winning their first European trophy, the club was in the second tier of English football and was facing bankruptcy. This was a very crucial time for Chelsea, as they risked having their whole existence taken away. Enter Ken Bates, who saved Chelsea by buying the club for £1 only in 1982. £1. Think about that next time you pay for your overpriced Starbucks coffee. This guy bought a whole football club for £1. Obviously, a £1 price is a symbolic transaction of a football club that's facing bankruptcy. Unfortunately, I've seen this happen way too often in Italian football. Anyway, back to our guy Ken Bates, who bought Chelsea for £1 to save the club from her death. Without him, Chelsea wouldn't be what it is today. Probably, Chelsea wouldn't even exist today. So, Ken Bates is the original savior of Chelsea before Abramovich became his savior again. During his ownership, he helped the club to win a long-running battle with property developers who were trying to kick Chelsea out of their Stamford Bridge stadium. For context, Chelsea didn't own Stamford Bridge at the time, but only rented it. After a whole legal battle with the property developers, he managed to save Stamford Bridge for the club, which is an interesting story of its own. Let me know if you want me to make a video about it. Anyway, not only he brought Stamford Bridge back to the club, but he also modernized and rebuilt it as an all-seater stadium. Under Ken Bates' ownership, the club made it back to the top division and stayed there ever since. But stability wasn't the only thing that Ken Bates brought to Chelsea. Things would really pick up for Chelsea in the 90s as the performances improved locally and in Europe. The club was achieving consistent top 6 finishes in the league. Chelsea won 2 FA Cups in 97 and 2000, a League Cup in 98, and another European Cup Winners Cup in that same season to make it into a double. That being said, they weren't even close to a league title, as that era was dominated by Manchester United and a little bit of Arsenal here and there. The closest that they came to winning a Premier League title was in 98-99 season, where they only finished 4 points away from a brilliant treble-winning Manchester United. I personally remember that era when Chelsea brought Italian players Gianluca Vialli, Gianfranco Zola, and Roberto Di Matteo, who would go on to win their first ever Champions League as their manager many years later. But the Italian connection didn't just end there. Goalkeeper Carlo Codicini and manager Claudio Ranieri would join the club later on. This trend would also continue post-Abramovich takeover as well, with Di Matteo, Carlo Ancelotti, Antonio Conte, and Maurizio Sarri becoming Chelsea managers in the recent era. I personally have good memories from that Chelsea team. They were honestly entertaining in the late 90s. I would compare the Chelsea of pre-Abramovich with the Arsenal of late Arsene Wenger era, a solid cup team that actually won trophies, but couldn't really get close to a league title. To me, they were a hipster's choice back in the day, a very likable team with international flair and beautiful football. But the era of Ken Bates wasn't without its faults. In the latter years of his ownership, the club was dragged drowning in financial problems, almost a similar situation that he inherited when he purchased the club. With an estimated debt of £80 million, he realized that he took the club as far as he could and started looking for new investors to sell the club to, and eventually sold the club to Roman Abramovich. And the rest, as they say, is history, or at least the history that people like to remember. But the question is, did Chelsea spend their way into success after Abramovich? Well, objectively, yes. As did my Milan in the late 80s, as many other clubs did and continue to do so with their investments. It's called capitalism, and the right investment is just one of the pillars of success. There are plenty of examples in the past where reckless spending alone didn't really work. Real Madrid's first Galacticos could barely gel together despite all the investments. Milan invested 200 millions in 2017 just to see it evaporate. Manchester United spent all that money in post-Ferguson era without much to show for it. Did Abramovich spend? Yeah, a lot. And we can't ignore the fact that it was a significant advantage for the club. But this was an era in English football that was ready for oil and state money to pour in. And had it not been Abramovich, it would have been someone else at any other club. The bottom line is, Chelsea was a European club even before Abramovich, but through him, they became a superpower. And luckily for Chelsea fans, the owner hasn't lost interest, unlike the case with Portsmouth or Malaga. We also need to remind ourselves that this was well before the financial fair play era. It's not like Chelsea was an elevator club that was yo-yoing between the divisions, who really went around the financial fair play to overspend. So, what do you think about Chelsea's history pre-takeover? I thought it would be interesting to revisit a club before a takeover that changed its history forever. I'm thinking about doing this as a series, maybe call it Life Before Their Takeover. Personally, I thought about Chelsea because their history is one of the most misunderstood before their takeover. Would you like a similar video on other clubs like Manchester City or PSG? Even clubs that are negatively affected by their takeover. Arsenal and Valencia come to my mind. And with that said, I'm Football Drawn, and I like to tell football stories with comic and drawings. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of the channel as well.